Thanks for joining us on Ministry Pivot. I'm Reverend Russell St. Bernard. Excited to have another conversation on what it means to pivot in ministry. I have some friends tonight, some colleagues tonight, some awesome co-laborers who are sharing with us, whether you're looking at it. We're recording at night, but whenever you're looking at it, prayerfully, it's going to be a blessing to you. We have Reverend Kendra Smith, who is an awesome leader and teacher. She serves with me at Kingdom Fellowship, AME Church, under our leader, Pastor Matthew Watley, who's doing great work there. Reverend Kendra is over all things outreach, all things missions, and doing a great job. She's going to talk about Kingdom Care and even other stuff that she did before she got into Kingdom Fellowship. But Reverend Kendra is with us on tonight. And then we also have Reverend Walter Thomas Jr., who is the senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Steelton. And he is a brother and a colleague and also doing great work. And then last but not least, we have the senior pastor of the Community of Hope AME Church, my friend, my brother, one of my mentors, Pastor Tony Lee. And he is doing a tremendous work always in outreach, but always not just in the DMV, but globally. And so that's our group for tonight. We're going to be talking about the ministry pivot of outreach. And so I want to pause and allow each person to talk a little bit about my first question to you all, and everyone can take this question. Reverend Kendra, we may start with you though, is what is your background in outreach? A lot of times people don't kind of see the fact that we have some experience before coming to the ministry. And so we think that because you're at a specific church, then you're able to do what you're doing. But a lot of the times there is experience, there's training that God has given us before we get there. So Reverend Kendra, your background.
Yes. Hello. My background in outreach started probably in my work in the community. So I've always, since my 20s, I think, had connection with community through my employment. So it was either social service or human service delivery. And so that was probably my first introduction. I think my first introduction to working in the community, engaging the community, was with an organization called Funds for Community's Future. And Pastor Lee is aware of this because we were friends back then. And I was shaking in my knees when they told me I had to work at Ballou High School, which was the only high school in Ward 8. And I was in my early 20s, and I had believed the hype about what it means to work in a city in Ward 8 in Southeast Washington. Of course, all of those myths and all of the things that people said were not true. And that's where I really began to learn. So it was really just that grassroots connecting with community, frontline work. And that just kind of led to other areas. That kind of opened my heart up. And then I went and started working for Covenant House Washington, which is one of the largest organizations in the nation that provides homeless services to youth who are homeless. And then worked for DYRS, Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. And so all of those experiences wrapped up into my love for God and my love for people. So it enabled me to pivot into ministry with that level of experience, working with people in a social service, human service delivery background. And so then I was able to combine my love for God, my love for the word, my love for people with that level of experience. So that's a little bit about, what I did before I got into ministry.
Amen. Cool. Pastor Lee.
So mine is very similar to Reverend Kendra. We worked in just some of the most significant places in the DC area and the DC and Prince George's County areas. I worked for an organization called Sasha Bruce Youth Work. I also worked for the Berets Youth Leadership Program. But then I was blessed to then also be working at the same time at the Ebenezer AME Church under Dr. Grange and Dr. Joanne Browning. And so with that, I was just a layperson there. And so I'm working during the day. I'm actually going to seminary at the same time at Howard University and at Ebenezer. And so I was able to kind of get this melding together of theological education, practical in-church stuff, because the Brownings are some of the best to ever do it. And then being right there in just some of the hardest places you could ever work in. In the beginning, I was a substance abuse prevention coordinator. So that meant that I stood on drug strips trying to tell people not to do drugs. So I would be, the drug dealers would be selling them stuff, and I'd be sitting there talking to folks about not using drugs and why it was bad for them. I was crazy and a little dumb. But yeah. And so that's kind of how it all started out, right?
Okay. Reverend Walt.
I'm trying to figure out my story, because for me, you know, I'm born in ministry, so it's always been attached to a ministry background, being born and raised as a PK. But I would say, I guess, always having that ministry family model, service and outreach has always been a part of who we are and who I am. One of my spiritual gifts is the gift of helps. And so I'm always looking of ways to help other people, to assist, to help lift somebody else up. And so through my ministry experiences and even through schooling, having gone to some couple Catholic schools and being a part of the curriculum was serving and doing outreach. And so even in middle and high school, that was something I was doing for school, but that began to become a part of who my spiritual DNA, if you will. And then getting into serving in ministry, in every ministry area that I worked in, I always thought it was key to have a service component to it and to have an outreach piece to it. Now pastoring, I'm seeing it on a whole nother level. I'm going to talk about it even more tonight in this season, how that has even maximized. But I think it's a whole new level now. But because of all of the experiences of the past from my childhood and growing up in a ministry environment and having that ingrained in me, that it's not about you, it's about serving and helping others. I think all of that has helped prepare for this moment.
That's great. So I'm gonna throw the question out, right? When we talk about ministry pivots and we talk specifically around outreach, and I'm gonna throw it back to you, Walt, to Pastor Walter, to talk about the first one, is what opportunities. And so I'm framing this because whether people are watching it or listening, I want them to get an understanding that even if you haven't, everybody on this line has been able to start already, but even if you haven't started, there's some opportunities that I believe that you can take advantage of, but there's opportunities as it relates to being able to do outreach in this season. And so my question to you, Pastor Walden, and everyone can answer this question as well, it's when COVID hit, I remember it was the third week of March. I remember it. We were doing service. We thought we were going to do all three. We were able to do one, and then we were not able to go back to the building. It was wild. And had you told me during the first week of March and the second week of March it was going to look that way, I would have looked different the first week of March, second week of March. But now that we're in this season, right, it's been hit with struggles, but there's been a ton of opportunities. And I think there's even opportunities as it hits, as it pertains rather to outreach. And so what opportunities, Walt, and everyone else as well, Pastor Walt, I call him Walt, y'all, because he's a friend of mine. What opportunities are there for churches as it relates to outreach in this season?
Gotcha. And I had to laugh earlier when you said senior pastor, because I'm not used to hearing that title used for me. I just hit 5 years.
Brother,
congratulations.
The way I want to put it, and even as you were speaking, it kind of just dropped in my spirit this way. COVID closed the doors to the church, but it opened the doors to the community. So it shut down our buildings. We couldn't get together and worship. But in our context, it gave us a entryway to serve the community that we had been looking for since I got here. First Baptist is located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the capital of the state. It is a rural area, if you will. It's different than being back in Baltimore in the DMV. It's different operation, different mindset. And one of the hurdles we found was trying to get into the community to do outreach, service, and everything. There were always obstacles, and folk would always say, "Oh, you can't do that here," which to me is like, "Oh, okay, I'll show you that we can." But we kept hitting our head against the wall. And so when COVID hit, it was as if the floodgates opened, and now the need was so great that us wanting to continue to provide that need, folk were like, "Oh, we're here for it." And so the opportunities that we began to see that we have done at our church is drive-through food bank, preparing meals for our essential workers. We began to even see more, and I don't know if missions is the right term, outreach is the right term, maybe it's in-reach, but we've seen more of our congregation look to help other members of the congregation who don't have access. So I'm not sure what the term is for that, but they've been helping one another as well. And so we started taking these new opportunities now and saying, okay, they're there. Let's go for them. How can we help people when they want the help now? There is no, we don't need this. Somebody else will do it. Now they want it. So we started partnering, and this was key for us to partnerships. We called the local food bank. Food bank said, normally you have to go through this, this, and this. They said, because of what's going on right now, we are waiving all of that. And we will just bring you all what you need, and you all hand it out. So we didn't have to do the paperwork, the filing, and everything. All of that was waived. People just showed up to receive. All the things that had been in our way before, this pandemic had a way of moving all of it out the way. And it seemed as if now everything became possible. We partnered with 2 other churches, and for the past, I think, month and a half, every week, we've been providing meals for essential workers. Things that before this happened, it seemed like we would have needed the strength of Samson, Goliath, and the sons of Anak to come and move all these mountains. But somehow it is all moved now, and we are seeing opportunities because our eyes are open to them.
That's good. That's good. That's good. I'm gonna ask Pastor Tony to jump in on the partnership part, because he and I had a conversation just around how I use the term all the time, how kind God has been. But when you told me about how partnerships work for you, I would love for you to share as much of that as you can, obviously here. But when Walt said it, it reminded me of the conversation we had.
Well, so, and I think one of the things the pandemics exposed things, especially institutionally. And so we realized the pandemic has exposed stuff about the nation. And so you start to see things about strengths and weaknesses, about churches, strengths and weaknesses. It exposed weaknesses in our theology. Just typical churches, it exposed just strengths and weaknesses. What we realized in our church was one of the strengths it exposed is we had always been doing outreach, but we didn't realize we were so built for it. So we thought we were doing it, right? We thought we were doing it. We were known for doing it. We were this, and that. But I was able to see our congregation in such a different light, and our workers in such a different light, and our systems in such a different light, and our relationships in such a different light. And so we had already started working on this collaboration, this for-profit, nonprofit, faith kind of collaboration. One of our members is a defense contractor, and so he has this for-profit is doing significantly well. We had a CDC we've been working with. We had been shaping this collaboration. This was before the pandemic, right before the pandemic hit. We had just formalized a lot of this stuff. The pandemic hits literally a few weeks later. Boom. And what happens is, in the middle of the pandemic, we're connected to a for-profit that can go into the supply chain. Because remember, in the very beginning, folks were having problems getting masks and toilet paper.
Exactly.
Right? We had a defense contractor who could get us all the PPE we needed and had a toilet paper plug. And so we ended up buying toilet paper and masks and giving them to our county government. So as soon as it hit, we ended up giving out like 5,000 surgical masks and 6,000 something rolls of toilet paper because they had issues with the senior centers and couldn't have enough toilet paper. And we gave them enough toilet paper for like almost a month or whatever. That God orchestrated those kinds of relationships and partnerships. But then what happened is, as we then started utilizing some of the other partnerships we already been giving out food twice a month, have been able to scale that up, etc. And so now we've started giving away food about 3 times a week. But what happens is when we started doing the initial giveaways good, then the county government looked at us, saw the collaboration we had. When we started giving when we would have plugged, the county council members would call and saying, "Hey, can you get me some toilet paper?"
That's good work, Reverend.
Right? Then it allowed them to see us as a different kind of a resource. And so then when the county started scaling up their food distribution stuff, then what? It made sense to make us a hub. So in the beginning, we were paying for everything. Now God is orchestrating everything so that they're paying for everything. We're just showing that we have the systems in place to be able to make it happen. And so I think that was kind of what we saw, was that God really allowed us to see that we had the relationships in place already. We had the systems in place already. And it just allowed us to scale up. The biggest thing I believe about this season is, in this season, from an outreach standpoint, it's not going to be about how much resources you have. It's really going to be about your ability to dream. That it's my witness and witnesses of others I've talked to, that as much as we can dream, God is providing the resources. As much as we can dream to help people, that God is sending the resources so that it's not draining or crippling the church to be able to help the people, but really the church is being strengthened by resources that aren't even of our own.
No, that's great. That's great. That's great. And I'm gonna come back to that dream part, Reverend Kendra. My question for you, and I mean for everybody as well, but for you is what? So Pastor Lee talked about it. Pastor Walt talked about it. But what does that look like as far as outreach now with partnerships? What does the week look like? And I think all of you have, and you all laugh, and then you all who are listening, you can't see the faces, but you're laughing because it no longer is. I remember, right, when I was doing youth ministry, I remember, and you remember that, Tony and Walt, everybody here was a youth minister.
That's right.
We used to bag the lunches and go down, and we do that, once every other week or once every other month, and we go down like. That was like you prep and then you do it once a month and hooray, this joint doesn't stop. And so can you talk to just what the week looks like? And then obviously everybody can chime in as well. Reverend Kendra?
Sure, absolutely. So very much what Pastor Thomas said, what Pastor Lee said is the same for us at Kingdom. We've been able to mobilize very quickly. And so I think to Pastor Lee's point, you don't realize the strength of your congregation, nor do you realize your capacity until you're put in a situation where you have to perform. And so our week is really from Sunday to Saturday because we were blessed in terms of partnerships. One of the ways that God has been kind to Kingdom is through grants and gifts. And so as we started where we were, doors started opening for us to apply for grants and gifts. And so now we have this whole Kingdom Cares Fund where members are donating and giving. We have all these grants. And so with that, it also comes reporting. So for me, Sunday, I have reports that I have to do to submit for what we did the previous week. But then we have all of our sourcing for food that generally happens almost daily, but generally at least once a week. I'm talking to, I had a conversation today. We did a pickup today from Global Foods, which is ethnic food store that we're now buying food from wholesale. So I'm constantly talking to them. Our other suppliers that we're working with, Montgomery County Public Schools, they're giving us the food produce from Montgomery County. So I'm constantly talking to her. What's your number for Saturday? What's your number for Thursday? Because at Kingdom, we have 3 distributions, 4 technically. One is mobile to Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless that we do. And then we have a Thursday, and then we have 2 on Saturdays in our Montgomery County location and in our Prince George's County location. 2 totally different counties, two totally different resources. And so we're mobilizing, we're getting the food. We picked up today, it was Tuesday, so we picked up from Global Food, picked it up from there, 124 boxes, took it to Kingdom. And then Thursday, we have a distribution. So today, after I did that, I went over, met with the apartment complex property manager, viewed the site. We identified where we wanted to put everything. And so now Thursday, we'll have the distribution. And then we have our two distributions on Saturdays, which, of course, with it's not just distributing the food. Everybody on this line knows it's the logistics with distributing the food, right? And so it's everything that goes with that. So I'm coordinating transportation. I've never in my life known about coordinating. You need a pallet jack. Does the truck have a lift gate? A lift gate? I would have known nothing about any of this. But it's when you're called to this, you do what you have to do, and you're willing to jump out there, and that's kind of what we did. And so for me, our week is not just filled with the actual distributions; it's also everything that needs to happen. Talking with the partners, we have a lot of, as Pastor Thomas and Pastor Lee said, we have a lot of relationships, and those relationships take work. And so you have responsibility and accountability as well, and then you always have new partnerships that are coming up. And for me, it's also writing grants. So I have 2 more grants that are due. One is due in August. Another one is due, I think, at the end of July. And so all of that kind of comes together around this whole concept of being able to engage the community effectively and meet a felt need.
No, that's great. That's great. Anybody else want to say a bit about what your week looks like? I have other questions, but I don't want to jump past that if you do.
I'll share for us because of our church and the way it's set up. I have a older congregation, which is one of the reasons why we had to shut down immediately.
Wow.
Because I knew if it started in our church, I may not have a church when all this was over. So we had to shut things down like immediately.
Wow.
But it has allowed my older members have a youthful spirit. And so what we do is every other week, so 2 weekends out the month, we're doing our drive-through food pantry. And they come down those 2 Saturdays and they work it and they set it up. They make sure it's good to go. But we've kind of sort of, we don't do every week to wear everybody out. But throughout those weeks, when we're not doing the food pantry, we've got the essential workers going on with the lunches. And so we set it up in such a way that while it's still work, it doesn't drain out my crew who's working it. So the essential workers, that partnership piece becomes key. We call in the order. And we made sure we use companies that were in our community, small businesses that will be blessed by the business. And then they deliver it out to the places so that, again, the work's still being done, but we don't have to do all of it ourselves. And so one of the things I did learn in all of this was, and it helped me personally, was you have to learn to do it on your level. If I'm going to give it a biblical context, you can't wear Saul's armor. And so I've had certain moments during this pandemic where I've judged myself against some of my brothers and sisters in ministry or even my home church. And my pastor had to tell me, he's like, you're not still here. You're where God put you now. Do what you're doing there. And what you're doing there is good for there. It may not be what is going on other places, but you got to do what you can do and you do it well. And so that's our week is different than some of the other ministries, but every week it's a week. And it's work.
No, that's wonderful, Pastor. I appreciate you saying that. So we're like 22 minutes in, and I think the ministry pivot, right? The question is, and when I listen to stuff and I'm getting information from leaders, I always ask, okay, the how. So you all are doing it, right? And God has been kind in how you do it. My question though is for the person who's watching, for the leader who's listening, may not even be the senior pastor, maybe on staff, or may not even be on staff, maybe a smaller church, and you see opportunity, but you don't know how to take the first step. My question is, how does a church start? Or if the church has started already, what things have you all learned that are good pivots for us to move forward? Because I'm going to end with the question of where do we go from here? Pastor Lee preached this years ago, and I'm going to end with that question for us to think about. But before we talk about where we go from here, I want to ask the how. What are some of the first steps that pastors, that leaders need to take in order to make this pivot in outreach? Anybody can go first.
And I think one of the first things to do is to look at your community and see what the pain points are. To see what the needs are in your community, and then see what your strengths are in attempting to meet some of those needs. Different congregations will do it differently, as Pastor Walt said, and different communities are different.
Yeah.
And so therefore different communities have different needs and will have different rhythms.
Yeah.
And so it is looking at your community. So say for us, we knew we had been doing a food distribution twice a month. And we knew that folks would start lining up about 3 hours ahead of time, and we would serve about 200 people twice a month. Right now, that's cool. When this started, and then we went to do something, and for us, it was Easter Sunday, and we really wanted to serve on Easter Sunday, not on during the week. We wanted to serve and have church online at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Which will come back to our where do we go from here?
I remember that. Yeah.
But what happened was that I turned to my outreach person. And you got to remember, this is before we had really seen how offerings were going to keep going, right?
Yeah.
All of us were scared. I mean, preachers were like, how is this going to go? We don't know how the resource is going to go because everybody's going to be hurting financially, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're kind of looking at your books, you're looking at your budget, you're trying to, figure how can we make it on a third of revenue. We're just trying to figure out how do we make this for the long haul. And I remember turning to my outreach minister, Reverend Tia Coulter, and saying, look, I want us to give out 500 boxes of groceries for Easter while we're having church. Tell me how much that's going to cost. Now, I wasn't really sure we could afford how much that was going to cost. Just reality.
Yeah.
But God provided what we needed to meet the need. Yeah. And it was amazing because where we used to start giving out, like I said, twice a week, after that, we ended up starting to give out every week and then about 3 times a week.
Wow.
My thing for people is look at the pain points and then just start and lean on God.
Yeah.
Lean on God. See what your people are able to do. Don't stretch them too far because everybody's going through the pandemic, so everybody is feeling some kind of way. But lean on let your people be able to express how they would, and then watch God kind of give the increase and God do the other pieces. One of the things I hurts people most right now is not stepping out and trying.
Yeah.
Right? Is giving up before they even try.
Yeah.
But for me, it's just give it a try and lean on God and believe God, and I bear witness that God will do it.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. I think because if you're in and I think that was the thing about the church. We were talking before we started to record that this was a reset, right, for everybody, because even though churches were good at one thing or good at another thing, at the end of the day, we are called to meet the need. And I thank God for our senior pastor, thank God for Kingdom and our leadership there. And the churches, we're called to meet a need, but this had a reset for everybody. That at the end of the day, there were people who are hurting, who are never been in this place before. I remember going to one of the days where Reverend Kendra was leading, as she does every week, leading the Kingdom Cares piece, and I saw a father who was bringing groceries from us with in one hand and had his girl's hand in the other hand, and it hit me to my core. It hit me different because I have a daughter, right? To understand that this is a guy who is, ably bodied, but for whatever the reason is, he's here and he needs help. I'm thankful that we're able to help, but I'm also understanding that this is a different moment and cause for a reset. But my question to back to Pastor Lee and Walt, you said it too, and everybody may comment on this. I still want to hear the how from Reverend Kendra and from Pastor Walt. But my question is, you said, and I think Pastor Walt, you said it too, but Pastor Lee, you said that there's a member at your church who worked at a certain place and was able to help you. But my question for the churches is, okay, I need to survey my community. I need to understand the pain points. But then how do I let the congregation know what I need help with? Because a lot of the times I think the congregation thinks we're good. They think we don't need help. but you were able to have people step up and say, hey, pastor, if you need this, how does a leader survey not just the community, but their congregation to see their level of willingness? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. I think one of the big things is you have to yell help.
Yes. Yes.
Like on
That's
the
good.
stream, on the email,
Yeah.
on the social media.
Yeah.
Help.
Yeah.
That's good.
Help us. And I think what blessed us is we had been teaching going into the new year a kind of an ecclesiological framework on what is the church and how we don't go to church, we are the church. And it was like, hey, help me, help us be the church.
Yeah.
Help us do the work. Help. And what we found is when you put out the bat signal, then folks started just saying, oh, I can help with this. Oh, I can help with this. Oh, I can help with this. Oh, you just had all these different kind of
Those are all different type of people. I got you.
Thank you. I didn't want to be gender specific, right? Everybody was like, I can help with this.
No, that's 100%. 100%. I agree with Tony on that one. I would say definitely by casting the vision and realizing you're going to need a team. You can't do it by yourself. Two of the things that God did for me before this hit, which now looking back on it, it was preparing me partially in the ministry for this moment. One was I began to utilize delegation more in the church. Had some folk who had joined from other churches who were ministers. One of them has a passion for administration, a passion for ministry, and I had put her over missions operations of the church. And so she has started getting us involved and doing different things, working with one of the local missions every month, doing, holiday stuff for Thanksgiving and Christmas and everything. And so she became the person to spearhead the efforts because I'm trying to, to build a new church in the midst of a pandemic, because that's everybody's building a new church right now, whether you realize it or not. You're building a brand new church in a virtual space, not brick and mortar, but you're building a new church. So I'm trying to do that, but she's got this covered and got the team working. So that was critical. But then last year we had to change our microphone system because the FCC was doing some stuff or whatever. And I did something I never do. I actually talked about it. I told the folk this was a need that we had and that it was going to cost some money to get this and whatever. I never do that. It's just not my personality. It's just how I am, which is a flaw. But I was like, all right, I'm just going to talk about it. After service, family comes up, Pastor, how much do you need? And it was so foreign to me, I didn't know how to answer them. Like, what do you mean? And like, for the system, how much do you need? And so I'm trying to figure out, well, I think we need to know, how much do you need?
Wow.
Told them, they wrote the check right there.
Wow. That's great.
And that helped me see, like Pastor Tony was saying, scream the help. And the good thing, I guess, about a pandemic is everybody knows there's a need.
Absolutely.
We're all in need.
That's good.
So they know that there's help. But the other thing that helped us too was documenting and showcasing what we were doing. Having, everybody's got a camera now right there, pictures and video of what we're doing and how it's blessing people. And that began to increase persons wanting to give, whether it be resources and time towards the effort. Because the news crews won't always show up for good news. They always show up for bad news.
Yeah.
So you got to begin to be your own reporter and share it out on these free platforms to let folks see what's going on. And when they begin to see it, you'll begin to see help pour in, even from other places you didn't even know were looking at you.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. Reverend Kendra, what's the, I mean, you could chime in on that stuff too, but the first step, what is the how? How do we do it?
I think that I agree with everything that Pastor Lee and Pastor Thomas have said, and especially the start where you are. So everybody, to Pastor Lee's point, every church is different. So before I came to Kingdom, I pastored. And so I launched a church, which is still standing, Rivers of Life AME Church. I was doing this work then. And before I came to launch the church, I was at Hunter Memorial. Then I was at Ebenezer. I was doing this work then. It just looked different. So you have to begin where you are. So when I had my church and I was pastoring, at that time, I couldn't do 500 boxes. So we did 25, 30. You know what I mean? We were, I think that when a person or church wants to engage, first you have to make a commitment and make this a priority.
Yes,
And be very clear with yourself and with your congregation. This is not something that we're doing just to feel good. We are being the church. And when you make that a commitment, when that's a part of your mission, that's a part of who you are as a church, you find ways, right?
That's
So that's one piece of, I think, that's really, really clear, because you can always say, well, I don't have enough to do it. But
Yeah.
the Bible is very, very clear that God is a God of abundance. So when Jesus fed the 5,000, especially in the Gospel of John, if you look at that text, they went from scarcity to sufficiency to surplus. They were like, we don't have enough. We only have 2 fish, 5. And then it went to, he blessed it, said, let's give it out. And literally the text says in the Gospel of John, and everybody ate. He said he wanted them to eat to their fill. He wanted them to be satisfied. And once they were satisfied, he said, go gather up everything else you have remaining, because I don't want anything else, the leftovers, to be lost. So then there was a surplus. So when you think about this whole food distribution or about outreach, I really do believe that God will meet us exactly where we are. So when you start with where you are, whether you're giving out brown bags, whether you're doing drive-through distribution, whether you're feeding essential workers, that I just believe that God then sends those resources. And then as you do cry help, because, you know, we do that a lot, you know, at Kingdom, pastor will get up and say, hey, this is what we're doing. We need people. I mean, pastor was shocked at how quickly Kingdom was able to mobilize. But I think it just showed him that there were people in the congregation waiting to be able to do something, right? Because all of this is bigger than us anyway. You know what I mean? My desire is, God, call me to something that's bigger than me. Because if I can do it by myself, it's not worth doing. And so that's what I've seen God do through this pandemic. And what we're doing, at least at Kingdom, is that God has, we started where we were with the 500 initially, and then we moved to now, you know, doing multiple distributions weekly. But we would have never gotten to the multiple distributions weekly if we didn't start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, because people aren't concerned about that. People are in need today. So they're not really concerned about how you're going to get it done. They're like, I need your support. I need your help. And so I think we get in our own way because we're trying to talk ourselves out of, to Pastor Lee's point, what we can't do because we don't feel like we have enough. But if everybody did what they could do, you know what I mean, then we really would, I believe, make a greater dent in this
whole,
you know, kind of food insecurity issue. But I could talk about this forever, so I'll stop right now.
Yeah, and Russ, even to add on to that, when we talk about our individual communities, you got to have a connection with the community. Even if it's one that didn't exist before this pandemic, right now it's the time for you to say, you know, we may not have been connected before, but now the need is too great for us to remain separated. The walls have got to come down. For us, we have a member who had a connection with the superintendent of the local school district. And so they had been in communication, and what arose out of that was the issue with the kids and their lunches. And so some of our members were able to help out, were able to spearhead even making sure that there was still a lunch program in the neighborhood for the kids. But that helped us see as a church, okay, the kids are getting fed. What about everybody else in the home? Which is why we went with the food delivery, the food drive-through piece, because we saw that was a need there. Now we're looking at, and again, it's about knowing your community. We're looking at the digital divide in our area. So you got to have some type of connection in the community, because otherwise you'll be doing mission work, but the mission isn't for where you are. And so it may be a good program, instruction system and everything, but if it's not for those who God has sent you to, that what they need, then it won't really have the results you may be looking for. So you got to make sure what you're doing matches where you are.
No, I would definitely agree with that. That whole, back in the day, we called it asset mapping, where you kind of went into your community and you were conscious about who's around you. Right. Oftentimes, if you drive in and drive out, you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. But if you are looking at who's already there, what are the other community organizations that are already there? We all know that schools are a great place to start. I don't unless there is some toxic atmosphere in the school, which there could be with the leadership. Most principals will take whatever assistance or help you can provide.
Yeah.
So I definitely would say that's another great place to start, is just to know what's around you,
Yeah.
and where you might be able to make that connection, and of course, collaborating with others. You don't have to do everything yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes as a church, we kind of want to be, the ones, but collaboration is great. And so, and people appreciate that, when you come alongside them and then they come alongside you. So,
And Russ, real quick, also
Yeah.
think it's important for us to become good storytellers.
yeah,
And I think in the beginning of the pandemic,
yeah,
what I realized was that the stories that were getting told the most on the news was of churches people thought were being irresponsible.
Mm.
Those would become major stories,
yeah,
and those were the stories that were really catching. And so for us, we were determined to be able to shape the narrative
that's good.
so that every time we did something, we were trying to work our connections to get it on the news.
That's
Because
good.
we wanted the story to be, we wanted people to see the kingdom doing something
Yeah.
that was a blessing in the middle of the pandemic. So I wasn't even getting interviewed. I was having my staff be interviewed. I was having right. But we wanted to make sure the story was done for. And so even the way we shape it sometimes, that's the reason that sometimes we would do food, sometimes we would do masks, sometimes we one time we did masks and toilet paper giveaway.
Yeah.
Well, it ended up being a huge deal, and there all these people coming, 1,000 cars showing up for masks and toilet paper. Well, it's hard to not say that's the story, right?
Yeah.
Because we're taking care of you on both ends, masks and toilet paper.
You know what?
I'm just saying. Now, hold on. I have to admit, I got that phrase from y'all pastor at Kingdom, so I have to give credit. He said it could be a joke, but he never thought I'd be bold enough to say it in public, and I've been running in public everywhere. But there was a need to be a teller. And what happened is then what? Then the news media would amplify the work of the church.
Wow.
And so then as the news media amplified the work of the church, then we would have people calling us trying to give to the work. And so businesses then would say, hey, I'd like to give to that work. And so then we had a business guy start giving us $5,000 a week because he just wanted to help to supply the work. But that came out of him watching it on the news and seeing what the need was. And so I think that we also have to become good storytellers and help amplify the story of what God is doing so that people can understand. It would have been horrible for Jesus to feed all them folks and nobody tell the story.
That's good.
Right?
That's good. That's good.
But here we are 2,000
That's real
years
good.
later referencing the miracle because what?
That's right.
Folks told the story.
That's
And all of them told that story. That story's in all four Gospels.
That's right.
Yeah, you're right. That's
It's
good.
one of the only miracles in all four Gospels. I went to seminary once in a while, right? So, it's in all four Gospels that folks told the story.
Absolutely.
And therefore we're here talking about a fish and barley loaves.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. And I think the importance of telling your story and tied back into what Pastor Walt said earlier is your story, right? And Reverend Kendra, like not trying to be intimidated, starting where you are. So the how is you start where you are, and you never know who in your congregation, who in your community is willing to send that $5,000 check, is willing to do something else. I have this term that I use all the time, that the people will meet your need as long as you're meeting God's need.
Right.
That if we're putting ourselves in line with what God wants us to do, that God's not going to send us something that He's not going to send people to help us with.
That's right.
And I think that's key in this. So we're going to wrap, but two last questions. The last one you already know, so it's where we go from here. But the one before the last one is resources and tools. So one was the how, right? But what are some resources and tools that churches and leaders can take advantage of? Reverend Kendra, you talked about grants. Pastor Lee and Pastor Walt, you talked about partnerships and some grants. I'm sure they're there. But what are some resources that a pastor, a leader listening to this now can look up in their area to be able to see? Maybe, is it the schools? What are some resources, and not just resources in people, but are there resources in systems? Are there things that we can use to help organize ourselves better as we get as we move forward in this ministry pivot, that none of us know when it's going to end, but we're all sure it's going to be a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah.
Well, I would say one for me. I believe every area has a food bank.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out to them,
That's right.
and find out if you can be set up as an emergency distribution center.
Yep.
Because that becomes something ready-made, turnkey.
Mm-hmm.
They drop it off, and you just become the distributor of it.
Mm-hmm.
You just become the site that helps to make that possible. That for us was a godsend.
Yep.
We had done something with them maybe about a year or so ago, and so when this came up, and again in our area, they waived everything else we had to do, and they bring the boxes. And simply give them out, and we show the love of God's people.
Yep.
I would say that is a definite resource that people need to look into in their area. If there's a local food bank, getting in touch with them. But the other resource that we found, and again, this goes back to telling the story, is in our congregation. Once members heard, they began to call in to our trustees and our treasurer asking, can I donate toward this? Can I give toward this? And so that became a major help just from those who are already a part of the body, who are looking for the right place to get connected with.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Any other resources?
And I'd say, in addition to the local food bank, looking at your local nonprofit infrastructure, and in different areas that's different. But looking at just various nonprofits that are doing different levels of work, because those folks are used to serving, and a lot of times those folks are looking for faith partners. A lot of times those nonprofits, even this season, this has caught them off guard, and so to be able to partner with churches that have human resource capacity may be able to help them to do what they may have they may have the capital, they may have resources, but not human resources. And so therefore, and churches are plugged into communities in ways that can be helpful. So one, I would say that. Two, I would say your government resources, your political figures, from the dog catcher on up. That all of them are supposed to be a public service. So you need to look at, okay, what do you do? How do you do it? How can we help you do what you do? And oftentimes what happens is your county council member has to do constituent services.
That's right.
In this season, they don't have the capacity from a human resources standpoint to meet all the needs of their constituents. But they have access to government funding that they can then utilize. And Kingdom has done an excellent job with the work that they're doing. We've attempted to do the stuff we're doing, connecting to some of those county council persons, et cetera, those resources, county executives, mayors, et cetera. And so I would say that. Also the business community, that you have business folks who are trying to find out in a pandemic how they can show themselves to be good members of community.
That's good.
But they don't have the systems to do stuff, and because they're businesses. But they may have resources or in-kind things they can give. That the church has the resources and the connections to be able to make stuff happen. And so I would say looking at those kinds of tiers to be able to then utilize what your strengths are, which we got people and we got connection to people and we can organize and mobilize people. And I think that when you do that, then you can play to your strength and then utilize those other strengths to help.
That's great. That's great. That's great.
Awesome.
Reverend Kendra?
They covered it. I think that those are, if you're especially trying to get started, each one of those resources can help you do at least one project.
Okay.
And so, so I think they laid it out.
Okay.
That's
So
awesome.
then help me start the next one. This is the last one. The last one before the last one. I'm like a Baptist preacher.
You got two
About 3 times.
No offense to the Baptist.
Wait a minute.
but so Reverend Kendra, where do we go from here? What's the net? And let me just kind of try to put this in a box. My prayer since it started, and I've talked to my wife about this several times, and just it's great seeing all of the work that all of the churches are doing. I do not know what the community impact is of that, But if we were to add up every church throughout the world who's serving people,
that's right.
that community impact would be wild. But on the flip side of it is, it's needed. And in many of our churches, in many of the areas, we run out of food and supplies. There's more need than we can meet.
Sure.
For me, the question is, what does that mean for what's next?
Sure.
And that's how I'm trying to couch this question. I think there's some innovation to come around, but what's next? With where do we go from here with this? This is gonna be, we're gonna be in this for a while.
Yeah. I think that for us at Kingdom, one of the next steps for us is going to be to continue to build on the relationships that we form. And so while we have these relationships and these partnerships we're doing, the grab and go food distributions, you can take those relationships to another level. So begin to look at what else you can do together. So don't allow this to be the only area of service that you have. I think another level of what's next is dealing with the root causes of food insecurity in the first place. So many of these communities were already food insecure before COVID hit. And so everybody on this call knows this just exacerbated the issue. So what are the other root causes? How are you going to address the unemployment issue? How are we addressing how people are now trying to transition back into employment? What are we doing about childcare? What are we doing about housing? All of those, it's like all, interlocking, systems of oppression is what we call them, right? Patricia Hill Collins, when I was in seminary, did a phenomenal book on these interlocking systems. So this whole food insecurity is not having food is not the cause. It's the fact that I don't have enough money. I may not have access. I have lack of transportation. It's all these other pieces. So now that we're working together in these collaborations to do the distributions, we're now having other conversations together. You know what I mean? You're putting pressure on your political leaders, right? You're putting pressure on the government to say, no, you need to release some more funding. First of all, you know what I mean? You need to release more funding for the food banks. You need to release more funding, for these other organizations. So I think that that's another area. And then for us, and for me personally, I'm also looking at how to move from this transactional relationship that we've been having with people to building stronger relationship with them. I think the food distributions are great. The one aspect of the food distributions that hurts my heart is that it's very transactional. So, I have blue. I'm a connector. I'm a pastor at heart. And so how do you connect with people beyond the produce box? It's what do you do when the music stops? You know what I mean? How? And so for us, that requires some thinking. That requires asking some other questions. That requires maybe reframing what we thought, you know what I mean? Because the communities that we're dealing with, while they might be brown and Black, the culture's different. So we're serving Latinx in our community. We're serving immigrants in our community. We're serving Afro-Caribbean in our community. And so now what does that look like, all right? How do you continue to minister? How do you continue to build relationship? So that's an area that we are, is our tension right now as a church. And we're, asking those questions to see how do we move, how do we move from here? And then finally, I'll say we are building better systems. So while we were able to mobilize people, we know that this is going to be here for a while, but we have to have systems in place in order to build our capacity. Because as you get money in and support in, you have to get it out. But you can't get it out if you don't have capacity. So for Kingdom, we're looking at where we can improve on our systems so that this can continue to flow without, necessarily me having to do everything. But thank God we have a great team and I don't. But, my heart is to see Kingdom create these systems so much so that we'll be able to not just sustain it, but we'll be able to scale it. So those are some of my thoughts.
That's good. That's good. Pastor T, Pastor Walt, either one, same question.
So, and I guess for us, it really goes back to, and what I've been reflecting on. I talked a little bit earlier about kind of this kind of ecclesiological. I had an ecclesiological epiphany. This whole concept of what is church, and for us, y'all smiling. I'm trying to act fancy just for a second. Just for a
I'm
second.
smiling because I know what you're gonna say, but go ahead.
Right. Right. And so what happened is when we first started, I told you all that we want our first outreach, our first major one was on Easter Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to have church online. We wanted to be in service online and in service and community at the same time. And what happened is that God showed me something. And what God showed me was that we would never be able to stop that even when we go back. So even when we go back, we're going to be shaping church differently, that we'll have teams in service and teams in community at the same time. And then what I've been able to see is that for us, while our church is called Community of Hope, it's going to be necessary for us to shape hope centers. And that is just going through our community, identifying places and demographically where the resources we have. And it's going to have to be way much more than just food insecurity, but all the stuff Reverend Kendra was talking about, because we got to deal with the health disparities. We got to deal with the mental health stuff. We got to deal with the domestic violence stuff. We got to deal, like, coming out of this. And then we have to be honest with the fact that reality is we're talking about coming out of this, but people are worried about the second wave. We haven't even finished the first wave yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I mean, we haven't even been able to flatten the curve yet off of the first wave, as we're then going to be heading into September. And so we have to figure out, what is that going to mean for our students and our young people who have to be home? And the fact of the matter is that a lot of the reporting of youth violence and youth issues and youth abuse is down because the people who usually are able to identify it are at the schools. And so therefore we know that our young people are grappling with and dealing with these kind of attempts. So how are we going to be able to get our foothold back in there to be able to make sure they're okay? The domestic violence stuff is accelerating because folks are having to be home, but it's not being reported as much because folks are having to stay with their abuser. Like those kinds of pieces. So what does the church look like? Workforce development. So most times when we do workforce development programs, we train people for skill sets, but they have problems giving them jobs for those skill sets. Yeah, we've had all of these jobs now disappear because of the pandemic. Yeah, what's it going to mean to do workforce development? And so that's the whole piece with partnering with for-profits. So for us, our partnership and collaboration is the for-profit is a government contractor. They can go out and get contracts, and then we'll train people for the contract.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Instead of training people for skill sets that they're not going to use, let us partner with partners who then get contracts so we can train people for contracts so they can get real jobs. But we're going to have to be thinking all of this stuff through and saying that this is not a church program, this is the church.
Cool.
Yeah, that's good.
Church is. This isn't just kind of a program of the church. It's intertwined with all that we are. And so I think that's what it's going to be for us, is how it's reshaped how we even see ourselves.
That's good.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Pastor Walt.
I just want to first say I had an ecclesiological epiphany. I just want to use that one time. That's all. I'm using that somewhere else, Tony, and you'll get partial credit. But I like that. But it's a funny time, and I guess for me looking forward, it's unique because we found ourselves in a space where we had to pivot while we were already pivoting. So we were making the pivot because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery.
Yeah, that's good.
And all of a sudden it's like,
that's right.
You're turning while you're already turning.
Yeah.
And so it kind of gave us a mission, put us in missional bifocals, if you will. Trying to look at these two different areas at the same time. And so I think what's next kind of has to marry the two. How do I deal with the issues that I saw coming up from the pandemic and the ones that are kind of married that are also coming up in the social injustice and the disparities in our area? And they're not far apart. It's just kind of seeing how we wed the two. So for me, I know it becomes a thing of education and empowerment. So helping folk understand more about the health disparities, understand more about the why their area is a food desert. And what type of, understanding healthy eating, stuff like that, economic empowerment, and understanding finances, and then taking them from just talking about it, but actually having it where they're building that up. helping folks become better managers of their money. So when something like this comes up, they're not caught off guard. They've got a savings account or a safe, a rainy day fund, something like that. So beginning to educate and inform people about what they need to help empower them in life becomes something, I think, for us that becomes key. When it comes to the church as a whole, I think the church is going to begin to be less focused primarily on worship and more on the work of the church. I would say for us, it was always, in my context, worship, Sunday morning, who's singing, how service going to flow. Are we getting these folk together? Everything in place for that. You know, is the run sheet ready? Blah, 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 blah. Now it's more the work of the church, our missions, how are we impacting people? Are the family life teams contacting members of the church? So it becomes now more looking at the work of the church, which is really what the church is. Like Tony was saying, it's more of not just we're pushing everything to get ready for Sunday morning. Now it's Monday through Sunday. How are we impacting lives? How are we helping people to see the love of Jesus Christ? So I think that is a major shift we'll begin to see. I think that we'll see more churches not have a problem with not gathering for worship on Sunday or a alternate form. Like Tony was saying, serving, having service and serving. Some of our brothers and sisters of another hue would sometimes close their churches down for worship and go in the community. And I know for me, I was like, I know ain't no way in the world we could ever do that. Now I see it's possible because God will provide. He proved himself to be Jehovah Jireh. And so I see there could be some sabbatical Sundays or service Sundays that churches begin to take on. And not become so overly concerned about we got to meet Sunday, we got to meet Sunday, we got to meet Sunday, because that's really more man-made than it is theologically based. That's some of the shifts I see for me. But one key piece I think that will be critical for the church going forward is our focus on mental health. What we see happening right now, I guess, on the grand stage with Kanye West and Tamar Braxton is kind of a glimpse of some of the stuff we're going to see when the world opens back up. And when our families start coming back into the church and the kids start getting into the schools, we're going to start seeing a lot of this, which is now happening behind closed doors. And as the church, we've got to be prepared for that. So I guess we're pivoting while we're pivoting, and we're getting ready to pivot again for what the new looks like, the new normal, or as my pastor says, not the new normal, but the next normal. What that looks like, we got to start pivoting for that even now.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good. Well, we're closing out. I do want to thank y'all again. Appreciate each of you for getting on. But I do want to leave with this question, and I think, Walt, that may have been yours if you wanted to be. If not, you can come back around on it. But is there? So we talked this hour now on pivoting outreach. Is there another pivot though that leaders, that pastors need to be mindful of? You don't have to explain the pivot, but you can just highlight the fact that while we're doing this outreach piece, we also need to be mindful of this other pivot that's going to be key to us succeeding in this next phase of ministry.
Let me share mine then, since you said I kind of already started it that way. I get out the way and let Reverend Kendra, Reverend Tony shut it down. For me, and it's something we actually already started doing now, is pivoting in our virtual impact. So while we're out the building right now, I actually got a team I was just communicating with earlier today who's looking at how do we make sure that when we get back to an on-site service, our virtual experience doesn't fall off. You know, we were always streaming and everything, which was cool, but it was like a low quality stream. And it was more so for the folk who really just needed it because they were watching something that wasn't high quality at all. But when we get back in the building, like I said, we have built another church now. Our virtual space, that is right now, that's our primary ministry. And it's going to continue going forward. There are folk who tune in to First Baptist who've never stepped foot in that building, who don't even know where we're located. They've never been in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in their life, but they tune in every week to be a part of service. I can't say now because we're back in the building, y'all go somewhere else. But the virtual piece, I think churches now have got to start looking at looking at getting some quotes, some estimates, hopefully get some free quotes, and then start putting something in place to start implementing, upgrading your systems, because you got to have virtual. The day of saying, I ain't streaming, I'm not doing online giving, that's dead and gone. So that's a pivot now. I think every ministry has to look, even if you're already streaming, how can you make it better? So that when you get back, it's not a fall off for those who became a part of your ministry while it was virtual.
It's good. It's good. It's good. Reverend
Kendra? Pastor Thomas said what I was going to say in terms of who we are as a church. So that was one of the pieces that I wrote down, is just pivoting on looking at who we are. Because I think we have in our mind who we think we should be. And sometimes who we think we should be doesn't mirror or match where you are. And so local churches are local churches for a reason. I believe that God puts local churches in communities to respond to that community where you are. And so if that is the case, then the question is, who am I now that I don't have all of these other things that are happening? The other one too, for me, was just pivoting in your perspective. And this was more professional than it really was for the church per se, because I think even being in this place as someone who's called by God, somebody who has a vocation, a ministry, you're put in a position to pivot in terms of how you see yourself and how you see God using you, and where God will have you to go. Because the pandemic opened up so many different opportunities, I think it's going to be the perspective that you have on it that can either shift you to go forward, or you'll stay off, obviously, where you are. So those are my two.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
So I must admit that I feel that Reverend Pastor Walter Thomas Jr. has an unfair advantage around this area of pivot. And the reason is because his father, Bishop Walter Thomas, a year ago at Bishop Jakes' Pastors and Leaders Conference,
That's right.
talked about the need to pivot in midair.
Wow. That's right.
That's Walt been cheating this whole daggone time.
I tried to find my notes, Tony. I couldn't find them. I tried it because I was ready. I couldn't find my notes.
I'm talking about we came back for that Pastor Leaders Conference, and my whole team did a whole training on pivoting in midair. Now, but what you hear from Pastor Thomas is that we're having to pivot in midair and then repivot and then pivot. Like we're pivoting off the pivot in midair. And I think in all of that, I think that with all of those pivots, integration is going to be important. We're going to be having to figure out how, as we're shifting in outreach, as we're shifting in online presence, as we're shifting and even what our worship experience is going to look like, etc. As we're doing all of these shifts, how are our systems set up to integrate things in such a way that we're not missing people and that we're not going past people, that kind of a piece. The last thing I'll say is this. I have been researching, I'm talking about researching Revolt TV. I've been watching Revolt TV like my life depends on it.
Okay.
Because Revolt, we can learn so much from hip hop culture right now. And the way that they utilize media, we can learn so much from these kind of social media influencers and the stuff they're building and the whole ecosystems they've been shaping, because they have learned how to do their stuff in a virtual space. And I think we have to be able to learn from some of the models that are even already out there to be able to help us then to see how do we integrate this stuff, because they've got the stuff that they'll do something virtually, but then they'll put a product to it, and the next thing you know that your kid is wearing the clothing, has got a little a debit card made by Russell Simmons, has got and all that stuff will come up. I never knew that a young black brother was a dude behind the Grumpy Cat meme. A brother is behind the Grumpy Cat meme, and that joker is valued at $100 million right now off of a Grumpy Cat.
Wow.
You see what I'm saying? Now, we've got the good news. This dude had a Grumpy Cat.
That's good.
Right? Oh yeah, we about to hit a lick out here. Good news. I got something way better than a grumpy cat.
Yeah.
So you give me the good news
Yeah.
and learn how to really maximize it in this moment and learn how to pivot in midair. Thank you, Mr. Walter Thomas. Learn how to pivot in midair. Then I believe that's where we're going. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's great. That's great. So we're wrapping up. We're done actually.
This is
wrapping up.
Close number 3.
This is it.
I got to leave you now, children.
Close number 3.
May the Lord bless you real good.
My hope is that this conversation, whether you watched it on video, whether you listened to it, that you will share it with the people in your ministry, in your circle, that you'll be able to do some of these ministry pivots that were spoken about specifically around outreach, but even the other ones. I thank you, everyone who's on. Thank you, Reverend Kendra. Thank you, Pastor Lee. Thank you, Pastor Walt. Appreciate you all and your gifts. Their social media IG handles are on the screen. If you're listening, I'm going to create there'll be some show notes that you'll have, so you'll be able to get the information there as well. And if you're listening or watching, wherever you're watching it from, please make sure you subscribe or you follow, because there'll be other conversations around Ministry Pivot, or you can go to ministrypivot.com, ministrypivot.com. All of them I have, and you can go to those so that we can keep you informed. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you and speaking with you again soon. God bless.